So
Mm-hmm.
the little phrase, pick your battles, worked really well when raising teenagers. And it works really well in a marriage. You know, there are going to be a lot of little annoying things, and you really need to let them go. I mean, we all have habits that can bug those who have to live with our habits, right? And who more than your partner. So it's really about saying, you know, let that go, let that go, let that go. This is something I don't want to let go because it just feels like it's more loaded. And then it's a matter of trying to couch whatever you say in kindness and remember to give that person what they need in order for them to feel safe and relaxed. And it's hard to remember. And I think if you grew up in a family where that didn't happen, it's really hard to learn.
Mm. Well, you know, on the subject of fighting in the context of a couple, there was this often cited survey done in 2011 in England that found that couples fight 2,400, the average couple fights 2,455 times a year, or roughly 7 times a day. Now, when I read that, my mind was kind of blown because I don't feel like I get into 7 fights a day, but they defined fights as a disagreement that could not be immediately resolved within a couple of exchanges. And when I thought about it, you know, there are probably 7-ish, maybe 5, a range of 5 to 8 instances throughout the day where we don't necessarily see eye to eye and we have to ask each other a few questions. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I did think it was really interesting. You know, those, obviously there's a range of fighting, of the various fights and how significant they become and how problematic they are for respective relationships. But
I'm thinking that study was done during COVID when everybody was spending, 23 out of 24 hours together, no?
No.
Because how could you have 7 fights if you're really separate all day long and you're only together first thing in the morning and then from dinner on?
You know, the article actually was from I think it was from this summer in the New York Times, but this study was from 2011. It was really interesting. The article was talking about how fighting during a pandemic has changed for exactly the reason that you're referencing, which is that when you're the 2 things happen when you spend all day long in a room with your partner, especially if you're also with your children at the same time. And the first thing is, obviously, there are more instances to disagree. The second thing is and this was a surprise. It was something that I hadn't thought about as it pertains to fighting, but it definitely makes sense. A little bit of the magic of being together goes away because you're not getting a break from each other. So you're not refreshing, recharging, interacting with other people, and then coming home and getting to face each other fresh. So I thought that was really interesting. Overexposure, exactly. So I thought that was really interesting. And those are 2 big issues that have come up over the course of the pandemic. My dad, who's a divorce lawyer, I remember him saying to me that he really thought that the pandemic was going to be a bit of a break, because
no, it was actually good for business.
He's been working a lot. There was another study that researchers wanted to determine what couples tend to fight about. So they gave them a list, 100 cohabitating couples, and each partner rated the extent to which the couple agreed or disagreed on 15 different topics. So it was everything from religious matters, demonstrations of affection, sex, finances, child-rearing practices, communication styles. And in general, people who were in couples tended to have a similar mean level, which means that was a similar level of things that they tended to disagree about or tended to agree about. But it was not always the same issues coming up over and over again. And so one of the conclusions from this study was so often there are issues that each prospective member of the couple was holding on to that wasn't necessarily getting communicated about. And so the conclusion was that the main ingredient in happy couples and in the function of a relationship was communication. And for me, that's always what it comes down to, is so often when there's an issue that Evan and I are disagreeing about, or even if I'm disagreeing about it with a friend, really zoning in on what is going on with the way we're communicating about it and how can I change that. And so often that surpasses the actual issue in terms of what the concern is. Does that match your experience at all?
And that's a skill. That is a skill that you can learn and you can practice. It requires practice. It requires constant vigilance. We don't automatically, come out of the womb being able to do that. And I think we learn a lot of bad patterns from our parents and those around us and friends, and certainly our leaders who don't seem to know how to communicate with one another. Let's not even talk about Congress here, but that's what I'm talking about. Can't get anything done because it's my way or the highway, and that's it. Well, that's just not how you can move forward. And I think that you're absolutely right, and that study underscores what to me is fairly obvious, which is not only that you need to communicate, because when you start to have discord in a relationship, often it's because you didn't say what you were feeling. And then the resentment builds and builds and builds until, like you said, it pops. It explodes. And then the person is dealing with your tone more than they're even dealing with what you're saying. And what you're saying is disproportionate to what you were originally feeling, which if you had communicated it in the first place in the way that you were feeling it, you probably would have resolved it in 15 minutes. But again, this requires, we've been married 41 years, but that's not without times where we've gone into therapy to really learn these skills and practice them. And then I hope provide some role modeling for our kids of what it looks like to move through the stages of a disagreement. I think for me, the word fight feels like that's what we're trying to avoid, is a fight. Mm-hmm. We can function a lot in this realm over here. Fight's up here and disagreement is down here. And there can be even maybe some sparring, but it's not like a full-blown fight. It's
an interesting hearing you talk about role modeling for your kids, because that comes up for us a lot too. There's an impulse when we have a disagreement, there's this impulse to not argue in front of them, not disagree in front of our kids. And the more I read about it and definitely the more I experience it and more I live it, I find that I think there are benefits to respectfully disagreeing with each other. And then if we have a reason to apologizing to each other in front of the kids in a loving, respectful way. And also, if I ever, my kids are 3.5 and 8 months, so I'm not really fighting with them. But there are times when, we might lose our patience for a moment, or they might not get what they want. And with Anna in particular, who's 3.5, I find that demonstrating to her that if I make a mistake, I can apologize to her is so important, because I want her to get that's the conclusion, that it's okay to have a disagreement, to not get along, to have a moment that's really hard for both people involved, and then to come back together, because the relationship and communication is always what comes first. But it really feels sort of counterintuitive sometimes. It feels like I should completely shield them from any bad feelings. But the more I live it, the more it seems like showing them that it's okay, and that it's okay to disagree, and that she gets to disagree with me, and that it's all okay in the end, is actually a good thing.
As your older and not necessarily wiser, but certainly more experienced friend, I would say yes to that. Absolutely. Because again, it's not realistic for her to grow up thinking that people don't have disagreements and that people don't lose their patience and people don't get angry, because they do. And she's going to need to learn or we hope that she will learn appropriate skills for how to deal with it, as you did in your family. So it's going to be easier for you because you had some good role modeling in that way. I have to share something funny. I don't know that I ever knew that the First Amendment to the Constitution has a fighting words doctrine. Did you know that?
No.
It's actually an exemption to the First Amendment, which protects free speech. And the fighting words doctrine allows for speech to be limited when it's likely to incite immediate violence or retaliation. Kind of interesting. Somehow I think this has something to do with last January 6th, but I don't know what.
Can't imagine what you're talking about.
Right. The other thing I wanted to share is that I found a series of 2-minute videos that were put out by the University of, I never know how to say this, Notre Dame. I don't know.
I think it depends on whether you're in, yeah.
Paris or Indiana, is that it?
Yeah, exactly.
In any case, they are the Fighting Irish. So they have created this series of 2-minute videos that showcases the work and the impact of the university students, faculty, and alumni on, and the title of it is, What Would You Fight For? So they have episodes on fighting to control diabetes, fighting for research that matters, fighting infectious disease at its source, and fighting for the dignity of independence. So I ask you, my friend, what would you fight for?
First thing that comes to mind is my kids. I would do absolutely anything for them. And I think that a broader answer to that question on that note is I would fight for this next generation. I think that they are going to be the key to the world thriving. You know, we've got a lot of problems that need to be solved. And I really would fight for this next group of kids who are coming up to be able to have a long and healthy time here on Earth so that they can help make it better for the generations that come after them. What about you? What would you fight for? A
beautiful thought. You know, well, the first thing I thought of is there are many things that I have fought for many decades and will continue to fight for. A woman's right to choose, women's rights in general. I remember, for the Equal Rights Amendment, which was a thing, go figure. And equal pay for equal work, all of that. LGBTQ rights, Black lives. But in the end, I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother. And I would fight to protect my children and my grandchildren. I would lie down in front of a train if it could save the lives of my kids or my grandchildren. And maybe that comes with the territory of being a mother. I know I've heard other people say this, so I don't think it's unique to you and me, but I think I will recommit to fight for justice because I think it's not a given, and it's certainly not meted out equally. And I think as a white person and a person who has never had to worry about where her next meal was coming from, I've really had a lot of privileges. And the older I get, the more in tune I get with the fact that I am not the norm. And there are a lot of people. I just finished watching The Maid, which I highly recommend, the Netflix series, or read the book. It was a New York Times bestseller. Which
good
really
friend of mine is in that.
Oh, really?
Amy Carrero from Young and Hungry. Yep.
How about that? Good to know. Well, I highly recommend it, and I can't stop thinking about it because it shows us this ugly underside of America, of the working poor and people who are absolutely struggling to make ends meet on a daily basis. And so I think fighting for justice, economic justice and other kinds of justice is really important. And having this episode on fighting today has reminded me of that.
I love that. I can't wait to watch that.
Thanks for listening today. We appreciate your support and we would love to hear from you. We have an email address, Gabi and Joanne at gmail.com. That's GABIAND JOANNE at gmail.com.
Please subscribe and review us. And you can find all the F words anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bye-bye.
Bye.